Welcome back to Race Report, guys. This week we'll be live reporting on the air from Weightgate. We stand by with reporters Julia and Lauren. Maybe they can give us a little intro into it.
This week on the pod, we are going to talk about the Belgian Grand Prix, the little Weightgate incident with George Russell, and also the summer break silly season that is already underway. But before we get too deep into that, Lauren, how about you start us off talking about what the hell's going on at Red Bull this week?
I would love to. So, this past race marks the fourth race in a row that Max Verstappen has not won. It also, of those four races that Max Verstappen has not won, he's only stood on the podium during one of those races at Silverstone. He came second. We all came into the season thinking that Red Bull was going to completely dominate. Well, that Max was going to completely dominate. And the season started off that way. And as the season's gone on and McLaren has brought their upgrades and Mercedes has brought their upgrades and Red Bull's upgrades have not been where they've wanted them to be, the field is a lot closer now with how many? We have 7 different race winners now, which is just wild to think. Like that, I don't remember the last time that happened, to be honest. So Red Bull is not this dominant force anymore, and you can kind of race by race, each of the 4 races that Max hasn't been winning, how it has been affecting him. Kind of you can hear it during his radio messages to GP, how he's just gotten increasingly frustrated and snappy over the radio. And in Austria, when they had their whole little, running into each other where Max just got too aggressive. So in Hungary, you could also hear Max just like kind of coming undone with the strategy not being what it used to being, because Red Bull strategy is normally perfect, so shout out Hannah because she's an icon, but it wasn't like absolutely perfect this time, and so he was just like bitching and moaning over the radio, and you could really kind of see how it was affecting him and how he's kind of started to crack more and more as the races have gone on, and he's kind of started driving more aggressively because he's like frustrated. So you can really kind of see how it is not just affecting Max, but I feel like it's also just affecting Red Bull. Like, they have all this pressure on them now, and they're making strategy mistakes that they probably wouldn't have made before because they didn't have this pressure on them. They knew they were going to win by a large margin, and so when it actually comes down to Max is not starting on pole, or like has to work his way through, and like the strategy messes up, and you lose out on another win, you really can see how he was just so over it. Like, even in qualifying in Hungary afterwards, I think he qualified P3, like slamming his hands on the steering wheel because he was frustrated. Because it's been a long time since Red Bull hasn't had like the dominant car on the grid. I also love how Helmut Marko gave Max a bedtime. So if you guys didn't know, Max also does like iRacing, sim racing, and he has done a couple like 24-hour races during like F1 race weekends. And so he had also in Hungary had done this sim racing the night before. He was up until 3 a.m. streaming and sim racing, and then obviously he then got up, I think again early, like later, and did his second stint on iRacing, and then obviously racing the Grand Prix. And so a lot of people were like equating him to like his behavior because he didn't get any sleep. I'm like, I'm sure that was a factor, but that's not the reason that all of that happened. But I just love how to kind of like have the media stop talking about it. Helmut Marko is like, he has bedtime. It's like, this is a grown man who now has bedtime is hilarious.
I just think it's crazy. Like, I know that we've talked about this since Hungary went down, and I made the comment of, I'm really sick and like, I don't want to keep hearing all race long. It was the commentators being like, oh, because Max was up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh, because Max was up at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like, this is a grown man. He is a grown man. He
Yeah.
can like parole his own bedtime. And yes, GP called him childish. He wasn't being childish because he was cranky and didn't get enough sleep. He is literally like, what is happening at this team? Why is everything falling apart? That's why he was in a bad mood. And this attitude that, well, he should have gotten more sleep and he shouldn't be doing the sim racing and all of that makes no sense, because a few races back in Barcelona, when he was doing the 24 hours of Spa sim race and winning it, won, he showed up to the race no problem and did great, and people were like commending him for that. So it's like, you can't do both.
I can sleep for 12 hours and still wake up cranky. Literally doesn't make a difference. I think more to Lauren's point, it almost seems like he's gotten to the point where he is overcorrecting so far. He's now making very common mistakes. Like how you said, these are mistakes that maybe if they were at their peak, like if we were mid-season last year, these are mistakes that wouldn't be happening. But because they're so wound up and in such a panic to regain that sort of dominant title and put distance in the constructorship between them and the fast approaching McLarens, it seems that now they're left, right, and center. They can't make up their mind on strategy. They can't make up their mind on hardly anything. They're arguing over, the radios, when this is a time when you should be focused in on racing and regaining sort of your points back, regaining your place back. And Red Bull still has a good car. I think there's no denying that. I mean, Checo's still able to place as high as he is with it, so that has to mean something. But if they really don't turn around if they don't take summer break to really lock in, I think it's very possible that Red Bull will lose the Constructors' Championship. And I don't know, maybe something else too.
I know we've also talked about it in a bunch of previous episodes, Checo's performance and the fact that he re-signed his contract. And I think it was 2 races ago, I think after Silverstone, they basically said, like, they're going to take Hungary and Belgium to decide Checo's fate and if he stays in the car. And, we found out today, Christian Horner came out saying that he will be staying in his seat for the rest of the season or for 2024, but he also failed to kind of make any comment on what that means for Checo's contract renewal. And it's like, okay, so does that mean he keeps it for 2025? Because Helmut Marko was pretty pissed after Belgium this weekend that Checo was starting from what would have been a podium position and finished behind Max, who had a 10-place grid penalty, and just smoked him. Speaking of what Lauren mentioned earlier, we've had 7 different race winners this season. None of them have been Checo. All of the other 6 winners that were not Max were both of the Mercedes drivers, both of the Ferrari drivers, both of the McLaren drivers, the 3 teams that are breathing down Red Bull's neck. So I just think it's crazy, and I've commented on it before. I don't think it's fair that when you've had previous seasons where Pierre Gasly loses his seat, Alex Albon loses his seat, and you build this repertoire of if you don't perform, you're out, and once again with Checo, but not for him. I have a problem with that.
I have 2 points to this. First point is, I'm wondering if it has to do with sponsorships, because Checo brings in a lot of money, and it's a very possible thing that if, Helmut Marko is all bluster and saying, well, Checo's out of here, the sponsors are going to say, okay, well, if he's out, so are we. How are you going to do the rest of the season? So I'm wondering if it's almost a placating action where it's like we have to bite our tongue and let him finish out the season at least so that we can keep our sponsor money and we can continue to compete. And then 2, it almost feels like not necessarily these midfield teams have moved up, but that Red Bull has fallen down. So it's not, Mercedes, you cannot say that the drivers from Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari are not great drivers. No one can say that. But it doesn't feel like the cars have necessarily improved so much as Red Bull has fallen down to meet them.
I feel like it's probably a combination of both. Red Bull has kind of stayed stagnant. Their car is not improved. And, that new McLaren car right now, in my opinion, is the most consistent car on the grid.
Yes.
And they have the car to win the championship. And I think that's another reason why it's getting to Max's head so much. And, he's really starting to break under this, pressure and crack is because he doesn't have his teammate to help him out. Whereas the 2 Mercedes guys are right there with each other. The 2 McLaren guys, the 2 Ferrari guys, and they're there to help each other and both score points and be there if they need to, hold off, or play defense or whatever. And Checo is so far down the field that he's not helping Max at all. Max is doing this pretty much on his own, and I think that on top of the fact that he's not winning, that's really getting to him. He realizes that, okay, we can actually lose this Constructors' Championship because I'm basically doing this on my own.
That kind of reminds me of, not to take us back to a traumatic event at Hungary, but one of the radio messages that Lando's engineer like said to him, trying to convince him to give Oscar back the place, was, this is not how you win a championship. You win a championship as a team. You need Oscar and you need the team. And that's exactly what Max doesn't have right now, right? Max has himself. He doesn't have Checo because Checo's not performing well enough to boost him up the way he used to. And he has the team, like, he has their support. We all know that. They're ride or die for him. But that's not enough when your competition has that full support.
And it's almost like they're split trying to do damage control between Checo and his sort of disastrous repeat over and over finishes, that they aren't able to present a united front. Sort of the whole saying, you know, united we stand, divided we fall. It kind of feels like that. Like they are trying to play two horses in the same race so hard when one is clearly falling behind, that the other, who could succeed very well, is suffering because of it and is now being driven up the wall, trying to grasp at straws to make it work. And he's basically SOL.
Where do we stand as of right now in the Constructor Championship between Red Bull and McLaren?
There's really not that much difference between them. Like, McLaren is chomping on the heels. Red Bull is at 408 and McLaren is at 345. So at this point, it really feels like anyone's race, especially with these last couple performances. I think it is very reasonable and very attainable for McLaren to win the constructorship. It is not even just a dream at this point. It is a tangible, tasteable goal.
One of the rate limiting factors of McLaren not being able to win the constructors is because Mercedes is also up there. Like, Mercedes has been taking away the wins from McLaren too. Like, we've now had 3 in the past 4 races that Max didn't win. 3 of those were Mercedes wins. Obviously, they missed out on a bunch of points with George being disqualified, but I mean, that if McLaren could have had the ability to win all of those races, and if they had, then the gap would be tiny. But because Mercedes was able to take 3 of those wins, that is really there's going to be this fight between McLaren and Mercedes of who's going to get all the non-Red Bull wins.
I hear that. I think yes and no on that, though, because out of those last 4 races, 3 of them being Mercedes wins, keep in mind George DNF'd in Silverstone when Lewis won.
True.
Yes, they both placed well in Austria, where George won. And then this race in Belgium, they got no points because George was disqualified. So in 2 of those 3 races that Mercedes won, George got no points at both. So I think it's still that back and forth, though, of these are both teams that are really consistently having their drivers basically place really in the top 5. Like, when's the last time Lewis Hamilton had a place finish lower than P5?
Like, right at the beginning of the season when they were terrible for a brief stint.
I think it's on. The only thing that I'm not going to like is I really hope it's not that, like, Lando loses the Drivers' Championship by 7 points and we have the whole, like, Hungary nonsense about it. I don't want to hear it.
I think that, yes, McLaren, if they get their act together, aka if Lando sees a sports psychologist, they might be able to. But I really don't think there's going to be a battle with the actual Drivers' Championship, just because there's so many different drivers winning races that, I mean, if it was just Lando winning the races that Max wasn't winning, for sure, but he's won 1, and, you know, there's been 6 other people that have won a race, and Lewis has now won 2. So I think either he has to really just dial it in and suddenly be, like, on his, like, absolute A game, and McLaren be on their absolute A game, getting, like, 1-2s.
The only way that Lando's going to beat Max in the Constructors' Championship is if he finally figures out how to start on the grid.
Bless him.
Again, I'm a huge Lando fan, love him, but every single race start has been rough to watch.
Abysmal.
McLaren's strategy has to get something together. All I'm saying is if Belgium had, let's say, 10 more laps, I think Oscar and Lewis would have been fighting for first.
I mean, I think if there was just 5 more laps.
Yeah. The way that Lewis was gaining on George was absurd, and the way that Oscar started gaining on Lewis was also insane in the last 10 laps of that race.
I mean, he was like 6 seconds behind and then ended the race just over a second behind.
Speaking of the race, We have to give some credit to George Russell this week.
Yeah.
We do.
I respect the drive.
I can appreciate the talent. I can respect his tire whispering abilities and his ability to stand up and be like, guys, I think we can do a one stop, and then executing it beautifully. The whole time I was watching it, I'm like, I don't want to give him props, but I have to give him props because this was a 10 out of 10 race for him. Like, Matt and Tommy, they do the driver ratings after every race, and I mean, it was Lewis, Oscar, and George that had a 10 out of 10 race for me. Like, I was thoroughly impressed with all of them. Extra thoroughly impressed with George. Like, that was to start, what did he start, P7 and win?
He pulled one out. Very unfortunate how it ended. It wasn't self-inflicted. And I was talking about this with a friend, that it's very double-edged sword, because one way you look at it, at least he can walk away saying, I did my best, I raced my hardest, and like that was a clean race that I should have won. But then on the other side, you really have no one to blame but your own team. And then it would almost, I don't know, like I go back and forth where it's like, would it be better if he had messed up and then he'd be like, oh, I threw away my own win, and then place the blame on himself? Or is it better to walk away saying, I know I should have won, and I know I braced my hardest, kind of. So I go back and forth on which scenario is actually the best. All around unfortunate for him, especially with how well he played the game this week.
And to give a little color in case like anyone listening isn't really sure what we're talking about, during Belgium, George Russell was one of two drivers who did a one-stop race. So he changed tires once during the entire race, took home first place. Unfortunately, I think it was like within an hour after the race end, he was disqualified, and that win was given to Lewis. So it ended up being Lewis, Oscar, Charles. Why was he disqualified? His car, when it came in for inspection, with fuel in it, was found to be at the minimum weight requirement, and that should suggest, okay, well, if we take the fuel out, it's not. So they drained the fuel, they reweighed the car, and it was 1.5 kilograms under the minimum weight. So as far as Mercedes is concerned on that, that is considered a violation, and George's win went bye-bye. Drive was incredible. That really sucks. His tire management was unbelievable compared to the rest of the grid, with most of them having to do two stops.
I truly hope for his sake that he gets another opportunity to race that well again, and to really show that show his merits again, and that he will be able to keep that race win, because it definitely was deserved in his case. And as happy as I am for Lewis to now be the race winner, it definitely is a very bittersweet win.
Yeah, I mean, that's just rough for the team, like, especially when you now are fighting with, McLaren and Ferrari, because the Mercedes car is suddenly good. Like, to have two no points finishes from George, basically, like, that just really hurts the team. And I know, like, obviously it sucks for George, like, to have that taken away after driving so well, and especially since his one win that did count really kind of was handed to him. This was a win that he had on merit, and then to have that snatched away, like, that's gotta really, really, really suck. At least, like, I'm not mad that Lewis got the win, but yeah, that was rough for Georgie boy.
Also, shout out Fernando Alonso. Like, in general, one, we love you. You are an icon. You are a comedy king. Also, happy birthday, because at the time of us recording this, it is his birthday.
My Leo King.
The oldest driver on the grid.
He's been racing since, what was it, 2000? Was that his first season? Since Kaylee's been alive on this planet? It might be a little bit later than that.
So, sort of more on the Lewis point, I think all of us, I can speak for everyone, we are very happy that if the win had to go to anyone, we are happy it went to Lewis. Great race by him. And I think he had made a comment even earlier in the race, sort of pointing back to George's one stop. If he had known that George was going to do that, he was also going to follow suit, because the tires were holding up much better than what was anticipated. Very sad for George. We've touched on that quite a couple times, but happy for Lewis. Did a fantastic race. He led many, many laps. So props to him. Props to him getting this win. So Julia has a confession to make to us. She has a bit of a problem. It's really not a problem because she hasn't started losing yet. It's only a problem when you lose.
Yeah. To kind of, put it out there, I may or may not have started sports betting on F1 races. How did this come about? Because I've never been good at gambling ever in my life. I had a friend who went to Vegas for like a weekend and he came back and had like downloaded a sports betting app and we were like watching the Euros and was like, I'm gonna bet. And I was like, I'm gonna make a crazy bet on like England winning, which like they didn't and it's whatever. But I could have won $500. I signed up for the sports betting app. He refers me. We both get like a free bonus. So we got six $25 bets for free. My initial investment in this entire process has only been $10. I put in $10. I bet that on the Euros. I used three of my free bets, and I had three left over at the end of that. So when Lauren was here for the Hungary race, I said, ooh, I still have three free bets to place. So I did. I placed three different bets. I don't remember what they were specifically, but I won one of them. So I think I made like a little over $30 on that one. And then this weekend, I said, I did pretty good last time. I should do that again. And use the free money that I had won to place some new bets. So I placed three separate bets this weekend, $5 each, so not like a ton of money. Bet number one was Lewis Hamilton in the top two. Bet number two was Charles Leclerc podium. And bet number three was Carlos finishes sixth or higher. If all three of those had worked out, I would have won $50 after taking into account the 15 I put in. But, and you might think this is weird, I only won money for Lewis top two. Oh, but like George getting disqualified means all three of those are valid, right? Not according to my sports betting app. Because, and I think this is ridiculous, they only take into account your winnings based on the actual podium ceremony. Even though George was disqualified and Charles Leclerc gets a podium, Carlos finishes P6, I don't get to win the money for that. But at the end of the day, I still came away net positive, and I will probably bet money again on Zandvoort.
She walks away to win another day.
I mean, while you're up, keep riding it until you're not.
Like, I'm not a gambler and I know nothing about gambling, but I do know about Formula One. So if there's anything I can place money on, it's the fact that I have a reasonable knowledge of, after qualifying and where everyone stands, making a decent guess on where they could finish.
Yeah, it's like, why not put a little bit of money on it? It's not like you're out here betting, thousands of dollars.
So off of the gambling train and back onto the race train, Lewis had a great race. George had a great race pre-disqualification. But we have another driver that I think needs a shout out, especially after he had a pretty rough weekend back and forth in Hungary. Oscar Piastri. Laura, you mentioned kind of off pod how well he caught up to Mercedes. Do you want to give us some numbers?
Yeah, so during qualifying, Oscar Piastri qualified sixth, and he ended up finishing third. That was actually second because of the George thing. But he really could have won this race if, I think, number one, he had had a better pit stop and didn't hit his front jack fan. And number two, he did have a couple little like moments where he kind of went off the racing line or into the runoff area, just a couple little lockups. But in the end, I think if the race was five more laps, he definitely could have overtaken Lewis. And with George's tires digging even more, I think could have won if he had really kind of gone for it. And definitely if there was, maybe 8 to 10 more laps. But it was just so impressive of how he went from being like 6-ish seconds behind Lewis. And this was kind of in the last like 5 laps, I think, went from, or maybe 10, I don't know, went from like 6 seconds to just over a second behind Lewis when the race ended. Like he was from nowhere in the camera view to all of a sudden like right up Lewis when they were showing them all fighting. I was like, oh, so this just became like them all right there together. So that was very impressive. And I think just with that 1 second being lost in that long pit stop and his couple little lockup runoff area moments, like if he hadn't have had those, he would have run an absolutely perfect race and really could have claimed the victory on this one too, I think.
I know Laura and I were texting during the race when we realized, like, oh, George is, like, in the front. Like, and we're like, no, it's fine. Like, Lewis has enough laps, he'll catch up to him. George is on old tires, he'll catch up. And he really was at the end, was so close behind him. And I think it's the same kind of comment of, like, if you put 5-10 laps extra into that race, I think Lewis would have gotten past George on those older tires, and therefore so would have Oscar. And I think it would have been like a Lewis Oscar fight for the win.
Yeah. And when it came down to it, I think like Lewis was right up by George, but I feel like almost he wasn't going as hard as he could because he was like, why risk us both messing up and Oscar taking the lead when I know that we can get a 1-2? It's great for the team, maximum points versus me fighting with George, something happening, and none of us getting like on the podium or neither of us getting the win.
Having a Max Lando repeat.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, be right up there and like kind of show him that you could take the place, but just really kind of get this team victory.
It really just speaks to Lewis's like maturity within the sport of like every driver wants to win, but him at the end of the day, like he has enough knowledge to like know that he could have and like really could have fought George really hard, but was like, yeah, but how much would that suck if on the last lap we hit each other and we're both out of the race?
Yeah.
So I think it was a really mature choice on his part, I think, to maybe back off a little bit and just focus on like how many points can we get as a team.
The other thing that I wanted to touch on briefly from the race, well, just kind of from the past couple races in general, is Lando. My brother texted me or texted in our group the other day saying he had was listening to the Beyond the Grid podcast with Lando, like the most recent episode, and basically was just like Lando needs a sports psychologist if he wants to actually kind of be in the fight to be consistently winning races and to ever become world champion because his mindset is so wrong that with that mindset he's like truly not going to get anywhere. Like he has all the talent in the world, but if he doesn't have that right mind space, that's all the talent in the world is not going to get you much of anything because you're going to end up self-sabotaging or just, you know, making mistakes that you wouldn't have been making because you're overthinking or thinking you're not good enough. And so therefore it resulting in a result that wouldn't have happened if you had believed that you were good enough. But yeah, I really think that McLaren needs to kind of step in and be like, okay, we need you to get some help. It's like when baseball players get the yips.
Lando's always talked a lot about like his mental health within the sport and like how like his feelings about himself have been like a difficult thing for him to come to grasp with, especially like really early on in his career where it's like, does this kid even deserve to be here? Then we kind of had a couple years where he was like, oh, I'm doing good. Like, look at what I'm doing for McLaren. And now we're almost having the like end fall off of that where it's self sabotage or like self criticism of I'm not good enough. I screw everything up. Like, I'm the problem. I'm the reason I'm losing. And it's like very toxic, negative energy. I mean, he's literally said in interviews, I think about Belgium, that like, I screwed this up for myself at the start. That same kind of like defeated post race interview that we used to get has like resurfaced. And it's really concerning because like, I'm a huge fan of him and I do think he has all of the potential in the world. And it's just really weird to see kind of the like flip between of there's moments where you see him and he has this kind of like bravado of like I can win a world championship, and then a race happens and it's I'm shit. I don't just like I hate myself.
And I think there's a difference between looking at how you raced critically, but you have to be able to walk away from that and say, okay, clean start, next race I'll do better. I think he holds on to that and then repeats probably to himself over and over and over and over again, I fucked this up, I fucked this up, I fucked this up. And that really, I mean, that compounds on yourself. If you can't break that cycle and be like, yeah, I messed this up, okay, I'm going to move on, that's okay. And I think it can, more to Lauren's point, he needs, I think, outside help at this point to sort of, help him back along to the track where he was and get him back to the point of where he feels like he belongs there and can race as well as we know he can. These past 2 races, very different circumstances, if that makes sense, because Max knows he's supposed to be there. Max has all the confidence in the world, but at the point where he's at, he's trying to overcorrect so much that it's now turning to mistakes. Lando has the ability, but doesn't feel like he belongs there. They almost feel like 2 sides of the same coin, where they are so caught up in their brain that they're not allowing their body to instinctively do what it's supposed to do.
In a way, in the last, 5 years now that he's been at the team, McLaren as a team has grown around Lando. And I think it's probably really difficult for him to separate his driver identity from the team because he feels so integrated in, well, McLaren isn't McLaren without me, and I'm not me without McLaren. And I think a sports psychologist would be like really helpful to kind of help him separate his own personal identity as a driver from the team. And with that, then he'd be able to kind of come to it and sit down and say, like, well, at this race, like, yeah, I didn't have a good race, but we as a team also didn't have great strategy, and like stop taking those things that are outside of his control too hard, because he's just compounding them all together, and every McLaren mistake he is coding in his brain as a Lando mistake, and they're not the same. So big news came out today, news that we've been waiting for what feels like
Literally the whole season.
Lauren, your little heart flame, Carlos Sainz has officially been announced that he is going to Williams.
He has, and I'm not really mad about it. I'm sad he's leaving Ferrari, obviously, but in case anyone didn't, I mean, everyone knows Lewis is my favorite driver, but it goes Lewis, Alex Albon, Carlos Sainz, and Charles Leclerc. And so to have all 4 of my favorite drivers at my favorite team, Ferrari, and my second favorite team, Williams, I really can't be mad about it because I really just have it all. Catch me next season fully decked out in red and blue. As soon as the Lewis Ferrari merch drops and as soon as the Carlos Williams merch drops, I will be purchasing. Yeah. So he took forever to announce that, and kind of everyone had suspected it was either going to be Williams or Stake, soon to be Audi at this point. And so I don't think anyone was shocked, but it was like, okay, I think everyone was just relieved that he finally was
employed.
Yeah. I was like, as long as you have a seat, please. Like, I really, at this point, don't care where it is. I just need you to not leave the grid. Thank you very much.
I think the funniest thing to come out of this is the fact that they both don't have an appendix. And this is the first time on the F1 grid that both drivers do not have an appendix. Icons. Icons. The dynamic duo we never knew we needed.
I saw a meme that, like, and it's like James Vowell's scheming because the Williams car is overweight, so he picks 2 drivers without appendixes to fix the problem. I also think it's funny, Lauren, like, you know the Tifosi pain, and so for you to pick 2 teams that are so hard to, like, rep and be like, yeah, is wild. Like, the only reason I feel like I can wear a Ferrari hat today is because they didn't do absolutely horrible this last race. And the only reason I'm not wearing Williams merch today is because, as happy as I am that Carlos has a seat, I am really sad for Logan. We're all really big Logan fans, and I just feel like there was such a great moment last season when we found out he was staying another year, and we were really relieved to hear it. Today, seeing kind of that announcement come out that Carlos has the seat before they even mentioned, like, we're not renewing Logan, for me, I think was a miss. I think that was not the best way to go about it, especially too when you look at Haas. Like, they came out and said Nico will not be returning with us, or Alpine saying Esteban will not be returning with us, before going and announcing drivers that they were keeping. And I think
it felt very discourteous.
Right. That's just the polite way to go about it. It almost gives me like flashbacks to the era McLaren, like Théo Pourchaire being like, I'm a McLaren driver, and then it was like, you're not.
I mean, but Ferrari did the exact same thing to Carlos, though. They were like, Lewis Hamilton signs at Ferrari. Oh, and by the way, Carlos is not renewing his contract.
When that dropped, I really think it broke the internet for a good while.
Oh, yeah.
It started the chaos that has been this season. Remember when we said we were so bored with silly season last year, and this year we're eating our words?
Like it's almost so much I can't even keep up.
They were like, okay, so we didn't give you a silly season last year, and we kept the grid the same, so we're just gonna like times two it on steroids for this year. IndyCar on top of that is just as bad. IndyCar was an absolute mess last year, and it's just even more of a mess this year. And then F1, I'm like, goodness. And there's MotoGP drama and NASCAR drama, and I cannot keep up with all of it. I have to like choose my battles.
I truly feel like I have whiplash. Like I'm like, what happened over here? What happened over here? What happened over here?
To circle back to Logan, though I'll be really sad not to see him on the grid next year. I'm one, still a Logan fan. Two, so happy that he did get 2 seasons out of F1. And three, really, really hoping that this does mean he's going to be on the Prema IndyCar team starting next year. I think that would be great. I know other rumor that circled the block this week is that Mick Schumacher is potentially the other Prema IndyCar seat, and I think that would be such a great like driver dynamic between the two of them. I would watch any content they put out with them hanging out
Oh,
because
yeah.
they're just such like
For sure.
cool, casual, nice guys.
My one request for Logan before he leaves F1 because I feel like we can pretty much say that that's going to happen, unfortunately, is that he scores points. I want him to go out on a high and to have some victory under his belt before he leaves. Like if that is what he accomplished, I mean, he's gotten to P11. So, I think it is a tangible, goal for him. I want him to, go to IndyCar hopefully on a high note.
Back to Carlos. Like Lauren mentioned, we kind of all thought like it's going to be Williams or Audi, but for a while there was such strong rumor that he could be getting that Mercedes or Red Bull seat. And I feel like he kind of maybe held out this long, waiting to see if they were actually going to can Checo or if Toto was going to, escape his Kimi Antonelli Delulu, which is not going to happen at this rate. But it's Williams. I don't know how long for. Should the next year not go well, I really hope we see Carlos in a top performing team because he is a top performing driver.
I agree. Yeah, hopefully, especially with the new regulations, and I know the grid overall is going to get a lot closer in 2026. That if, I mean, both Albon and Sainz are amazing drivers, and I think together they will do really well. They both know how to play the team game. They're both very smart drivers and like have lots of kind of that technical knowledge that they use to their advantage. And so I think together on that team, they, regardless of even if their car is not like one of the front runners, will still be able to do great stuff with it. So I kind of am really excited to see the dynamic between him and Alex.
I want them to take a picture together with their appendix scars. I want that to be their first group photo.
I feel like I am still kind of wondering what made him pick Williams because I feel like it was such a unexpected, not unexpected, like the rumors we knew like it could probably be Williams, but like what is it that they were able to tell him that made him say like I feel confident about this? Is it Adrian Newey? Is it not?
I think between the two seats that he was pretty much told that he could have, which was Stake and Williams, I'm sure both of them were like, yeah, we'll sign you for sure. Williams has way more money to offer. Like Sauber's about to be bought out. Like it doesn't become Audi until another season. So like the next season's salary would be very small. He's making quite a good deal at Ferrari, and Williams has a lot more money, and a lot more to offer him monetarily wise, and that I quite literally believe is the reason.
So we are taking bets on where Adrian Newey is going. I'm saying Williams. They don't think Williams. I'm alone in this decision.
I was praying Ferrari, but I'm pretty certain it's going to be Aston Martin.
Yes.
there's just a really good logic behind it. There's money there. You have Lawrence Stroll who can fund whatever he wants. Two, Aston Martin is a team that is just barely almost catching up to the top. So it's an opportunity to really improve a car. And third, we know while Newey was at Red Bull, one of the endeavors that he took on was basically building like a hypercar. Aston Martin has the opportunity to do that for him. He can build an Aston Martin hypercar. So it kind of checks all of his boxes, whereas maybe a team like Ferrari is not as much of a challenge, and maybe Williams is too much of a homecoming or can't give him those other outside things, either funding wise or outside interest wise.
I'm still betting Williams.
It would make sense if Carlos went there for that.
Exactly.
I'm Team Aston Martin. I just have a feeling. That's all I'll say about that. I mean, that's been the word on the street, and I've had it from multiple sources, word on the street, so.
Honestly, that's the next seat that I want confirmed.
Yeah, where's Adrian Newey going?
I feel like we won't know until like a random cameraman catches him in the paddock, like walking out of a garage next season, and we'll be like, we know where he's from. We know where he's at.
I mean, I think one thing that's important to note with Newey specifically and Newey changing teams is it is not really going to affect the 2025 car. That car's already been in development. At earliest, it will be the 2026 car with the regulation changes. Whatever team he goes to, we're not going to see the full result of that until 2026 at really the earliest.
Whatever team he goes to will be a very lucky team.
I just need a Fernando Alonso win before he retires.
I think that's his goal.
I want him to be a world champion. Just win the championship.
That's what he wants. Fernando's entire goal right now is I'm going to stay at Aston Martin through probably 2026. They get Newey. If Fernando doesn't win that championship in 2026, I think that's when he'll maybe actually consider retiring. I think he's holding out for that at minimum.
Just holding out to be back on that top step. I mean, just him being back on the podium, just how much that, like, kind of fueled his passion again for F1. I mean, that would just make my whole life, to be honest. Fernando Alonso wins at age 45.
Our only other recent driver announcement has been Esti Besti to Haas. So he is now going to be on a team with Ollie Behrman, who will be a rookie next year. I think that could be a really dangerous game.
I think it will be trial by fire for Ollie, and he will either crash and burn with the help of his teammate, or he will shine.
I was really hoping that it was going to be Valtteri to Haas, because I felt like Valtteri and Ollie together would be a good pairing, because Valtteri could be a support system for him to lean on and learn from, whereas even though his nickname is Esti Besti, he's not really known to get along very well and work very well with any of the teammates he's had.
Yeah. After that, we still have, going into the summer break, there are still 4 open seats. We have Alpine has an open seat, V-Carb, the Merc seat, and the Steak Sauber Audi Kick seat. Whatever they want to be called.
It's crazy that we've made it this far into the season, and we still have open seats.
Merc seat, I think, to me, is signed, sealed, delivered now that Carlos signed at Williams. I think it's going to be Kimi Antonelli.
Toto Wolff is stupid. Like, actually stupid. Kimi himself is like, I'm not ready for it.
He's about to Logan Sargent that poor kid. The only thing that would be crazier, though, is Valtteri goes back to Mercedes.
That I would live for.
V-Carb, I know that this is, like, crazy, but Danny's, like, vibes lately have been giving me the energy that, like, he has a seat.
Oh, yeah. After him, like, chatting it up in the paddock with Horner and the V-Carb team principal, and I wouldn't be surprised if Horner was like, you have the seat, like, tentatively for 2026.
Liam Lawson needs a seat.
Give that man a seat.
If Red Bull does not give him a seat, he will go elsewhere, and someone will take him.
At Steak or Alpine.
I could see him in Alpine.
But then Jack Doohan doesn't have a seat.
That man is not getting a seat. Like, ain't no way.
Wow, Lauren. Tell us how you really feel.
He is going to be a great F1 TV presenter. I'll give him like a 37.2% chance of getting a seat. Like, I honestly will be so mad if Liam Lawson doesn't get a seat and Jack Doohan does. Actually, you know what? This is the two drivers that I want in the other seats because, okay, Merc, whatever, V-Carb, whatever. We have steak and Alpine, basically. I want Liam Lawson in a seat and I want Colton Herta in the other seat.
I like it. And a gentle little plug. If you're not following us on TikTok, you totally should be. We have been putting out some crazy content, one of which was what we think each driver's Summer Olympics category would be, just based on vibes alone. The posts have done crazy great. We love seeing all of the comments and everyone else's kind of hot takes on the sports that they would play. Some honorable mentions was Lance Stroll playing tennis, which literally just makes so much sense. Oscar Piastri playing hockey, or in America, if you're listening, field hockey. Checo. We had said Checo would be a volleyball player, and people were so confused about it.
It seems so right. Like, libero, just imagine Checo in the volleyball uniform and then you will see it.
If you want to see it for yourself, pop on over to our TikTok. It is at racereport.motorsports, and drop a comment on what you think.
Well, thanks for joining us again for another fabulous episode of Race Report. Don't you worry, summer break will not stop us. You guys might even get to hear the origin story of Race Report. So tune in next time. We love you guys. Bye.